The wind never stopped out here. It crept in through the spaces between the wooden slats, slid under the warped floorboards, and sighed its way across the empty rooms of Thomas Callahan's ranch house. It carried dust like a memory too stubborn to fade, fine as flour and twice as bitter. By mid-morning, it coated the windows and filled the hollows in his boots. Most days, he didn't bother to sweep anymore. The land used to be a promise. Rows of wheat, rising gold against the blue cattle. Thick in the hills, a woman's laugh dancing from the porch, while a boy ran barefoot through the chicken yard. That was another life, buried beneath the drought, and the fever, and the accident that stole his boy in the spring floods. Now it was just Thomas, a brittle stretch of scrubland, and the ghosts he didn't have the good sense to bury. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at a blackened coffee pot and the empty chair across from him. He hadn't bothered with breakfast. The ranch had stopped giving, and Thomas had stopped asking. A man learns not to look too long at what he's lost. A sharp knock rattled the door. He didn't rise fast. No reason to rush when there's nothing you're hoping for. On the other side stood Etta Mae Lawson, all hat and judgment, with the kind of expression women save for men who'd once had a future and let it rot. "Town's holding an auction," she said without greeting. "Kids from over at the state mission. Orphans, runaways. Some just lost. You could pick one up for near nothing." Thomas blinked at her. "Cheap labor," she added, "since your hands ran off." "I don't need help," he muttered. "You do," she said, sharp as a needle. "Before winter comes, you do." The door shut gently in her face. Still, he found himself riding into town that afternoon, hat pulled low, coat heavy with the scent of sweat and cedar oil. The main street was choked with wagons and people, the kind who never had much but liked to feel rich when someone else had less. A makeshift platform stood outside the church, and on it, lined like livestock, were the children. Boys too thin to lift a shovel, girls with eyes too old for their faces, and in the middle of it all, one girl who didn't look anywhere at all. She stood straight, hands at her sides, as if she'd long stopped expecting mercy. Her dress hung loose over a small wiry frame, and her dark hair had been hacked short, likely to keep lice at bay. She didn't flinch when the sheriff called out numbers, didn't blink when a man with whiskey breath shouted bids for the blond boy beside her. She simply stood. 12, the sign read at her feet. Thomas didn't mean to raise his hand, but when the auctioneer's voice stalled, searching for another bid, it rose of its own accord, slow, reluctant, like a man offering his soul to something he didn't yet understand. $3, he heard himself say, and a mule. Laughter rolled from the crowd like thunder across dry earth. The auctioneer grinned, crooked and mean. Sold. The girl climbed down from the platform without waiting for instruction. Her steps were silent, boots worn smooth at the heel. She stopped beside Thomas's horse, looking neither grateful nor afraid, just waiting. He didn't speak. Neither did she. The ride back was long and quiet, the horizon pulling itself flat and wide around them. Her name wasn't offered, so he didn't ask. It wasn't until they reached the ranch house, stillness pressed into the bones of the place. Then he finally said something. "You'll sleep in the barn?" She nodded. "Work starts at dawn." Another nod. He handed her a blanket, coarse and folded, then turned to go inside. She paused on the threshold of the barn door, one hand resting on the wood. "I can cook," she said softly. He didn't answer. The door clicked shut behind him. That night, the wind carried a new sound, the slow crackle of fire in the stove, and the faint smell of cornbread. He didn't know where she'd found the meal or the nerve, but it was waiting for him when he wandered into the kitchen. She wasn't there, only a tin plate and a spoon laid out like an offering. He ate it all. The days passed like fog rolling over dry hills. She worked without being told, collecting eggs, hauling water, sweeping dust that never stayed gone. She rose before he did and slept after, always in the barn, always in those worn boots. He never asked her name. One morning, Thomas noticed something odd. The woodpile behind the barn was stacked neater than he'd left it. Not just added to, but arranged in tight, careful columns, like someone had tried to make sense of disorder. He found her at the chicken coop, fixing a latch with baling wire. She looked up but didn't pause. "You built that stack?" he asked. She shrugged. Didn't seem right to leave it leaning. "Where'd you learn that?" She kept working. Watched. She never spoke more than needed. But Thomas had begun to see it in the small things. How she listened like a deer in the woods. How she memorized the way he moved when he worked the pump. How her hands copied his without asking. At night, he sometimes watched the barn from the window. Once, just once, he saw her dancing barefoot on the hayloft floor, turning slow circles in the moonlight. There was no music, just her, and a silence so deep it held rhythm. He never told her. He saw. In town, they whispered. "Callahan bought a girl now," someone muttered at the feed store. "He's lost it." But Thomas didn't care. The ranch had started breathing again. Fences stood straight. Chickens laid regular, and the mule didn't shy from the girl like it had from grown men. One evening, while he was saddling the horse, she approached, carrying a handful of nails. "Barn roof's leakin'." He looked up. The clouds were heavy. "I'll fix it tomorrow." She didn't move. "Storm will come tonight." Her eyes, dark and unreadable, held something sharp. Not defiance, not fear. A kind of knowing. The kind that comes from sleeping through too many nights with rain dripping through cracks. He nodded. Together, they climbed the ladder, her smaller, hands quick and sure. As they worked, lightning cracked somewhere beyond the hills, painting the sky with light too brief to follow. Thunder rolled in, and the girl pressed her palm flat against the roof, listening. "This place," she murmured. "It wants to live." Thomas stared at her. "You talk like a preacher." She smiled, small and secret. "I talk like someone who's still here." And for the first time in what felt like years, Thomas laughed. It came rough, like the first cough after a long illness, but it stayed with him, echoing against the rafters, folding itself into the wind. By the time the rain began, soft at first, then pounding, the roof held. The girl didn't go back to the barn that night. She sat on the porch, legs pulled up, blanket wrapped tight. Thomas sat beside her. No words passed between them, but something heavier than silence settled in, something made of trust and time. He glanced at her, wondering again what had led her to that auction platform, what had carved such resilience into such a small frame. "You got a name?" he asked finally. She waited a moment. "Clara," she said. He nodded once. "All right, then Clara." And in the darkness, something shifted. Not loud, not sudden, but real. A man with more dust than dreams had taken in a child, meant to work his fields. But already, she was remaking his world in small, invisible ways, like roots beneath dry soil, pushing toward water no one believed was left. Outside, the storm began to pass, but something else had just begun. Clara never took off her boots, not when she slept, curled tight as a question in the hay, not when she bathed in the creek on Sundays, dipping like a shadow into the water and scrubbing her skin raw, but leaving those battered boots just beyond reach on the bank. They were part of her now, worn through the soles, leather cracked like old parchment, laces knotted with care and secrecy. Thomas noticed, but he didn't ask. He wasn't ready for the answer, and Clara didn't offer it. The days were kinder than before. The ranch still groaned like tired bones, but it held steady. Clara had a way of stitching silence into something useful, the way she swept, repaired, fed the hens with murmured songs that no one else had heard before. She tended to things like she was fixing something deep and unseen. Not just the ranch. Him too, maybe. She didn't smile often, but when she did, it was never shallow. It was the kind of smile that felt earned. One morning, the sheriff came riding up the lane, dust curling behind his horse like smoke from a slow fire. Clara was chopping wood in the yard, small hands clenched tight around the axe handle, boots planted firm. Thomas stepped onto the porch. "Morning, Tom," Sheriff Barker called, dismounting. "Morning," the sheriff nodded toward Clara. Thomas didn't answer. "Got a telegram," the sheriff said, patting his coat pocket. "From Kansas. A reverend's been looking for a girl, matching her age, named Clara Sue Weatherby. Disappeared from a church orphanage outside Wichita. They think she stole a locket from the head nun's drawer before running off." Thomas felt the weight in his chest shift, not panic, just pressure. Clara didn't stop chopping. "Telegram says she ran twice before. Last time they reckoned she left someone bleeding. Still," the axe swung. "You ever seen that locket?" Barker asked. Thomas shook his head. "Never seen her steal a thing either." The sheriff sighed. "You know they don't care if she's doing right now. System don't track change, only history." "Let me ask her," Thomas said. The sheriff gave a shrug like dust off his coat. "You've got till next week. I'll be back." When he rode off, the wind followed. Clara didn't pause until the wood was done. She stacked the last log, then stood with the axe resting beside her, face unreadable. "I didn't steal it," she said quietly. Thomas stepped closer. "But it was you he meant." She nodded. "I took something that was mine. That's not stealing. It just looked like theft to them." He tilted his head. "Someone bleeding." Her eyes hardened, just slightly. "He tried to make me pray lying down. I told him no. He didn't like that." Thomas's hands curled at his sides. "That why you wear the boots?" he asked. She looked down at them. "He only ever hit me when I was sleeping, when I had M off." He didn't know what to say to that. So he said nothing. But later, as she scrubbed the porch steps with a brush and bucket, he watched her, the shape of her back, the set of her jaw, and something inside him began to ache in a place that hadn't felt anything in years. That night, he sat at the kitchen table and pulled a small cigar box from the high shelf. Inside were pieces of a life he didn't touch anymore. The photograph of his son in a tin frame. A lock of hair tied with ribbon, a rusted thimble that had once belonged to his wife. He added something new to it. The old leather gloves Clara had outgrown last week, the fingers torn from use. She didn't know he kept them. The days that followed crawled by with quiet urgency. Thomas found himself waking earlier, just to see if Clara had beaten him to the morning chores. She always had. One evening he came back from the edge of the property to find a fresh pie cooling on the windowsill. She didn't bake for praise, only to make things feel whole. But the sheriff would be back soon, and Thomas's new choices were crawling toward him like wolves through brush. Keep her, risk the law. Send her away, break something fragile neither of them had dared name. At the general store, he asked Mrs. Halbert what she knew of the Wichita orphanage. "Mean folks," she said, tapping her spectacles against her chin. "Call themselves saviors, but I heard stories. Punishments with belts and silence. Kids ran off regular. Most got brought back bruised or worse. Why are you asking? No reason." But when he returned home, Clara was waiting at the porch. Steps, dust clinging to her elbows, that axe glinting beside her like a second spine. "You're gonna send me back?" she said. Thomas shook his head. "I didn't say that. You didn't need to." There was no tremble in her voice, only certainty. "Then tell me something," he said. "Why here, of all places? You could have run anywhere." She looked toward the hills. "I was tired of running. This place didn't ask questions. I should have," he murmured. "No," she said gently. "You let me breathe." He turned from her then, unsure whether to rage at the world or at himself for not being able to fix it. That night, he didn't eat. Just sat on the porch and watched the moon climb like a silver coin tossed by heaven in the dark. He heard her step onto the porch behind him. "I ain't going back," she said. He nodded. You'd stop me. He didn't speak, but in his silence, she heard her answer. Clara walked into the barn that night and didn't come out until morning. When she did, she had a small canvas sack over her shoulder. Her boots were laced tighter than usual. Thomas stood at the gate, watching the sun rise, blood orange over the hills. I've been thinking, he said. You came here to stop running. Maybe this place can be yours too. But it ain't safe just yet. She tilted her head. So what then? We go see the Reverend, he said. Together. Not with law. Not with chains. With truth. Her eyes flickered, wary. I don't run from what's behind me, she said. I know, he said softly. But it still follows you. She didn't respond. Just stood there, one boot half in shadow, the other in light. A wind kicked up again, not harsh, but steady. The kind that bends wheat without breaking it. The kind that promises storms and survival all in the same breath. Clara turned to look at the house, the barn, the crooked fence line she'd fixed plank by plank. She didn't smile, but something softened in her shoulders. If I go, she said, and he lies, and they try to take me. They won't, Thomas said, and for once, she believed him. Because even a girl who never took off her boots knew when it was time to walk forward, not away. They left before dawn, a canteen between them, 2 blankets tied behind the saddle, and the horse Thomas named Blue, only because she'd always looked like a storm waiting to break. Clara rode behind him, arms wrapped loose around his middle. Her boots thudded softly against the saddle leather as they climbed the long trail toward the North Road, the one that would lead to the dusty town of Marion and eventually to Reverend Eli Granger. She hadn't spoken much since. They'd decided to go. Thomas hadn't asked why. Maybe silence was the only way she knew how to carry her courage. By noon, the sun pressed hard against their backs. The fields turned to rock, and the road split near a grove of cottonwoods, tall, sun-bleached trees that leaned into the wind like weary old men. Thomas stopped the horse. He dismounted, tied Blue to a bent fence post, and reached for his canteen. Clara slid down, her boots crunching on the brittle earth. She wandered toward the cottonwoods, dragging her fingers along the bark. That's when she saw it. Near the lowest branch of the 3rd tree, a name carved deep, the letters uneven, the strokes raw. Clara says 2nd line beneath, I ain't what? You made me dot. Her fingers hovered just above it. Thomas stepped beside her. Yours. She nodded slowly. First time I ran, I was 9. Stayed here a night, then turned back. Wasn't ready then. Guess I thought maybe, if I wrote it down. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Thomas looked at the carving. The bark had grown around it a little. Nature trying to heal the wound. But still, the name stayed. You ever wonder, he asked, who we are when no one's watching? All the time, she whispered. They rode on by late afternoon. Marion came into view. A town with more clapboard than character. Dust rolled through the streets like it paid rent. Men leaned against walls with that half-alert air that comes from watching too much without moving enough. They tied Blue outside the general store and walked together to the mission house. It sat at the end of the street, cross above the door, paint peeling in soft sheets like dried petals. Reverend Eli Granger was waiting on the porch. He was older than Thomas remembered, thinner, bent slightly at the waist. Like life had worn him more than time. He recognized Thomas, nodded once, then his eyes landed on Clara. His mouth tightened. You found her? I didn't find her, Thomas said. She found herself. The Reverend stepped closer, his eyes scanning Clara like she was a page he half remembered. We've been praying you'd come back, child. Clara said nothing. I kept your things, he went on. Your hymn book, the locket, even your ribbons. We always hoped you'd see the light again. Thomas felt Clara stiffen beside him. I didn't. Leave the light, she said. I left the ones holding the candle over my head. The Reverend's jaw tensed. We only ever did what was right by the Lord. You hit me, Clara said, voice flat, locked me in the coal room, burned my palms with prayer candles. Granger, face twisted, not with guilt, but with a performance of regret. You were wild. We had to drive the devil out. Thomas stepped between them, quiet but firm. She's not here for forgiveness. She came to say, she's not yours. She's a ward of the church, Granger snapped. The law, she's mine, Thomas said, the words heavier than iron. I'll take her name to the judge. She's got a home now. Granger stared at him. You can't just keep her. That's not how it works. Clara's voice cut in like a blade. You didn't keep me. You caged me. A pause. The wind picked up, tossing grit across the boards. Granger looked at her again, this time not as property reclaimed, but a voice that wouldn't hush, a girl who no longer flinched. She'll be judged, he said. You both will. Thomas took Clara's hand. Maybe, he said, but not by you. They turned and walked back down the road. Behind them, Granger stood stiff as a crucifix, hands trembling just slightly at his sides. They didn't speak until they reached the horse. Clara exhaled. He never expected me to come back taller. No one does, Thomas said. That's why we must. On the way home, they stopped once more beneath the cottonwoods. Clara walked to her tree again. This time, she took Thomas's knife and etched the third line beneath the others. I stayed free. She didn't ask if it was foolish. She didn't explain why she did it. She simply did. That night, they made camp under a sky so wide, it felt like a mouth mid. Thomas lay staring at the stars, his coat wrapped under Clara's head, the fire dying low. Do you believe in fate? She asked suddenly. He thought a long time. I believe in choices, he said. And in the quiet between them, she turned, her head toward him. So what happens now? He didn't answer right away. The crickets filled the silence for him. Now, he said finally, we make the ranch more than a place to hide. She smiled, just barely. In the morning, they'd ride back. The sun would rise again. The fields would need tending. Blue would nudge the fence gate for oats. But that night, with a name carved in bark, with truth spoken under the gaze of someone who once held power over her, Clara slept with her boots off, and for the first time, Thomas saw her toes, curled soft, beneath the blanket, unguarded, not broken, not wild, just growing. The first frost came early that year. It slipped quiet across the land like a memory, kissing fence rails silver, turning leaves to coins that glinted beneath a low morning sun. The pines along the ridge stood tall, unmoved by weather, yet Clara swore they whispered that morning, as though they too had lived long enough to forget their own names, and had just now remembered. She was 16 now, though she rarely said it aloud. Time had passed, not in calendar pages, but in chores done, fences mended, seasons survived. Her boots still stood by her bedside each night, but they were clean now, worn from work, not running. Thomas watched her from the barn doorway, her silhouette framed by the pale orange glow of dawn, hair longer now, braided down her back like rope holding her steady. She moved like she belonged, not just here, but in herself. The same girl, but grown into her bones. It had been nearly a year since they returned from Marion. The Reverend hadn't come back. The sheriff had once, but not to arrest or warn, just to nod and say he'd read a new petition from Thomas, asking the county judge to transfer guardianship of Clara Sue Weatherby to him, full and proper. The sheriff didn't ask questions, only said, some things are better seen than written. That was that now. The ranch had begun to feel less like survival and more like life. Thomas planted peach trees near the porch. Clara raised chickens from hatchlings. They kept a few sheep, too, one of which followed Clara like a shadow, convinced she was its mother. But something had shifted in the wind. It started with a letter. Clara found it in the mailbox, nailed crooked on the gate. No return address, only her name. written in block letters, and inside 3 sentences. He still remembers your face. He knows where you are. Run. No signature. No threat. No date. Just dread. Thomas read it twice, then burned it in the stove. You don't think it's from Granger, Clara said. I think whoever sent it wants fear more than truth. Is there a difference? He didn't answer, and that was answer enough. That night, Thomas oiled the rifle he hadn't touched in years. He placed it by the door, loaded, but hidden behind a curtain, just in case. Clara didn't sleep. She sat on the porch, watching the tree line. That was the first night she put her boots back on. Over the next few days, little things began to shift. A pile of stones moved beside the well. The barn door left swinging, though Clara swore she'd latched it. Blue returned from the pasture one evening, with a long scrape along her side, not deep, but too sharp to be from brambles. Thomas kept calm. Clara did not. She stopped baking, stopped singing. The kindness didn't leave her, it just folded into silence. She began carving again, not just into trees, but into wood panels, onto the sides of the barn, on the gateposts. Small symbols, circles, names, words no one else could decipher. She said it helped her remember what she'd survived. It kept her here. Then came the second letter. This one was shorter. 4 words. He's almost there, girl. Thomas read it, folded it carefully, and placed it into the cigar box beside her old gloves. We could go, he said softly. Clara shook her head. He'd follow. And I'm not smaller than him anymore. So they waited. They reinforced the windows, locked the gate, asked the McCaffreys up the ridge to send word if they saw a stranger pass. The land stood still, holding its breath. And then, one evening, he came. The man on the horse wasn't dressed like a reverend anymore. He wore black, but not for mourning. His coat was long, dust-covered, stained at the hem. His face older, hair receded, but the eyes the same, cold, precise, and empty in the places where mercy should have lived. He stopped at the gate and dismounted slowly. Thomas met him halfway down the path, rifle in his hand, not raised, not yet. Reverend, he said. Thomas. Granger nodded once, then looked toward the porch. I've come for the girl. She ain't a girl no more. Granger smiled. That's what makes it dangerous. Thomas stepped aside just enough to block the view. She's not yours. She was. Spiritually, she made a covenant. I intend to correct her path. Then you've misunderstood the word shepherd, Thomas said. You don't fix sheep with fire. Granger's eyes narrowed. You don't know what she did. I know what you did. A silence like thunder rolled between them. From the porch, Clara stepped down, boots firm, face calm. No fear. Not this time. You came, she said. I always knew I would, Granger replied. Your kind always call the devil home eventually. She walked toward them, slow but steady. When she reached Thomas's side, she didn't look at him. She only looked at Granger. You used to call me wicked. You still are. Then let's make peace, she said. Right here. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the locket, the one he'd claimed she stole. She'd kept it all these years. Never wore it. Just kept it close. She opened it, and inside, instead of a picture or verse, was a scrap of cloth stained red and a tiny carved word. Mine. Granger paled. You remember this, she said. The cloth you shoved in my mouth when I wouldn't pray the way you wanted. I kept it, not to curse you, but to prove I outlived it. She dropped it in the dirt. Granger reached for something, a small blade in his belt. Quick, hidden, but Clara didn't move. Thomas did. The rifle cracked once, a warning shot into the sky. Granger flinched, staggered back. Next one's not air, Thomas said. Granger looked between them, fury rising, chest heaving. Then something broke in him, or maybe he just saw the truth at last. The girl he'd once caged stood taller now, and the man beside her was no longer grieving. He turned, mounted his horse, and rode away. They watched him disappear into the trees. When it was quiet again, Clara picked up the locket. She placed it on the fence post. Let the wind have it. That night, she sat beneath the pines, Thomas beside her. They said nothing for a long time. Then Clara whispered, "You hear them?" "Hear what?" "The trees, the pines. They remember." "What do they remember?" She smiled, eyes glistening. "That we lived." He nodded. "That we weren't just broken things." Clara leaned back against the trunk. She took off her boots, laid them beside her, and rested her head on the earth. In that quiet moment, the land itself seemed to breathe again. Not because the danger was gone, but because she'd chosen to stay. Because she'd named herself more than what was done to her. Because home wasn't just walls or fields. It was the place where no one made you forget your name. And so, the pines remembered. And maybe, just maybe, the world began to. If this story stayed with you, let it settle. Let it breathe inside you. If you've ever had to outrun a shadow or build a home from nothing, know this: you are not alone. Like, share, or leave a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget, sometimes the strongest stories begin in silence. We'll see you next time, under the wide western sky.